Anyway. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and call this special assembly meeting for Tuesday, January 4th, 2022 to order. It is about 3:04, I guess. And Madam Clerk, would you do the roll call, please?
I will. Tim Hale, are you on the phone?
Here.
Stephanie Nowers.
Here.
Dee McKee is on her way. Robert Yunt will not be present. Moki 2 is on his way. Jesse Sumner.
Here.
Ron Bernier.
Here.
You do have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda for our special meeting? Okay, hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. So if you'll all stand, and I'm going to ask former Assembly Person Stephen Colligan if he would lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Steve. We're now at audience participation. This is your opportunity to speak to the assembly about any item, whether it's on the agenda or not. And if you're on the phone, if you'd like to speak, hit *3, and then it will state that your hand has been raised, and Caleb then will lead us through the next part of that. So audience participation is now open.
I don't have a sign-in sheet either.
We don't have a sign-in sheet, okay. Caleb, do we have anyone online? No, nobody online? Okay, so without any objections, then I will go ahead and close audience participation. So the item that we have for item of business is a discussion regarding the gravel tax. And I see the industry is here again. I just want to thank the industry for their patience from our last meeting and coming again. We appreciate that very much. Who's going to lead this?
I just hand it off to Mr. Colligan.
Mr. Colligan? I guess you're up, sir.
Everybody's got the handout, Steve.
Perfect. So, Steve.
Oh, can you turn me on? Thank you, sir.
I
Thank
think
you.
I'd know that by now. So Steve Culligan, a resident of Wasilla, lifelong resident of the state of Alaska. I did sign up on the personal, just to testify personally. And so before I get started, there's a couple things that, you know, as a former sitting assembly person, you never get used to the fact that the public gets their 3 minutes of fame to tell you how you feel and the like, and believe whether it's factual or not. But there were a couple things read into the public record that I would like to kind of address. One is that the gravel industry pays no taxes. The actual, if you look through, and maybe if you're going to continue this discussion, to have conversation with the assessor, and some of the people making those claims are actually from the agricultural industry in the valley, which we're all very supportive, and there's no person more favorable to go to the store and buy my carrots and fresh vegetables and potatoes in the winter. But the fact is, the appraised value of land versus the assessed value of land that your assessor generates, the gravel industry and parcels pay 100% of the going mill rate of their appraised and assessed at 100% of appraised value. The farming industry, on the other hand, even though we're used to it, pays somewhere between 5 and 20% of that value. And I just think it's interesting to have this discussion as we go forward of people that aren't in the farming, but buy agricultural products locally, et cetera. And that's not including all the other things that we support, federal subsidies, et cetera, taxes and the like. The other was that outside corporations own these large gravel developments. Part of that is because the regulations are getting to be so much, you have to have professional engineers, professional registered environmental consultants and water quality folks to keep up with those regulations and reporting. And so it's a very large cash outlay and cash risk and insurance. And so They're local companies that have local, in most cases, union-trained labor, but it's only possible with outside investments, like banking, investment, security, et cetera. And so you'll find that there are local companies that have investors from outside in the larger versus the smaller organizations participate. And we're here as Alaska Rock Products, an association of local professional operators that learn from each other with best practices. We have participated in the entire process and supportive of the current permitting system and even go forward. It's helped keep industry and the public communication going and is very beneficial. But, you know, unfortunately, this sense that this industry pays no taxes and stuff is really kind of a nonsense. And then comments from pilots that they don't like flying over gravel pits. Every small airport is a previous gravel pit or developed gravel site. And I would, if we want to have an open discussion about the FAA and the like and what the general public pays for all aviation transportation, that would be great. So moving on, we appreciate the opportunity as industry. So I want to introduce Alaska Rock Products. It's been around since before 2008 of smaller operators and larger operators pulling together to develop best practices, not trying to individually invent everything and having a professional dialogue with local government. And part of it is regulations. The other part is just pure safety for their workers and resource development. So we put together an outline to cover the full gamut. I don't imagine that most of you, maybe Mr. Sumner's been in the development business for a long time, but I know as an assembly person, when I first started, I wasn't directly in that. I've been in the person mapping and engineering business, but in resource development, all the permitting requirements, you know, I was kind of surprised at the level and what really has to happen to, you just don't get to go out and drill a hole in your own ground and start hauling it down the road, and there's impact. So industry has been supportive. And so what we've done is put together maybe a 30, 40-minute presentation with different experts to convey how we operate. And hopefully, you know, this isn't the perfect environment, but I think some of the long-term goals of the borough are going to take a dialogue between industry and the public. And somehow we've got to figure out, and I think Jesse, Mr. Sumner, I'm sorry, have put forth a discussion of how are we going to develop solid waste services and those things without dumping a bunch of materials on the market. How are we going to develop it safely in transportation? But to start with, the idea of taxation. So back in the day, and in 2012, the state got out of the taxing of gravel industry just because they spent more money managing it than they did collecting in resources. There was no net gain and there was no positive monitoring of tons and yards, and we'll kind of talk about that. And everybody thinks it's, you know, we would all like if it was as easy as a alcohol tax where it's regulated and you just open up the cash register, send the bills, and you automatically get a check from the state for alcohol that's sold in the region. It's not so. And then if there's any conflict or any you know, questions about reporting, et cetera, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to survey it, et cetera? And we all feel that, you know, there may be other opportunities going forward to look at the permit process rather than the resource quantity taxation, that there's different ways to accomplish the same thing if revenue is really the discussion. And I think industry is willing to talk about that. So number one, I'd like to call up Patrick Cummins. He's a longtime Palmer resident, and I think he went to Palmer High School, was with QAP, owned by Alaska. And he is probably one of the most qualified experts that goes through the permit process, that handles and deals locally with the state, federal, and local permitting process with the borough. So at this point, I'd like to have him come up and make some comments about the CUP process, the conditional use permits, and the like, and then we'll kind of move on from there. We had a couple members. I know Mark Cattini, a professional engineer, is on his way. You know, I've got trees down the power lines in my driveway. I think he had 3 houses in his neighborhood without power. So we'll kind of be flexible and go from there. And then ultimately, Ms. Nowers, at the closing of the last meeting, you had some comments about reclamation and the water table. So we've have a presentation about that. And I know people are concerned about reclamation. Development happens over a long period of time, but it eventually happens. And so we had a presentation for the slides that hopefully we can show you that show local and Alaska-based previous gravel pits that are now high taxable properties, et cetera. And then we'll discuss the water table issues and permits and stuff that's required through the permitting process. So with that, Patrick?
Okay, before he comes, I just want to say for the record that Assembly Member 2 arrived at 3:07 and Assembly Member McKee arrived at 3:08. So they are both here in the chambers with us. So, hi.
Hello, good afternoon. Madam Mayor, Assembly, thank you for allowing us to speak. I'm Patrick Cummins. Today I wanted to talk to you about some of the things we go through as far as the CUP process and getting permits for the gravel pits. First thing I'd like to talk about, first thing I got to correct him, Colony Knights, not Palmer. Big difference. Materials that we need are used for capital improvement projects from buildings, commercial building sites, highways, airports. I've heard comments in previous meetings that I've been in that people will say a lot of these aggregates are leaving the valley. That may be true for some of the aggregates, but a lot of that goes to help build like the Glen Highway, which supports 50,000 vehicles a day at least coming from the valley to Anchorage. So there's a lot of valley residents that still benefit from that as far as airport improvement projects and Glen Highway projects between here and the valley. One of the big things with our gravel sources is transportation costs drive a large percentage of our costs for gravel. The transportation costs alone can exceed probably 80–90% of our cost at times. This leads us to needing material sources in strategic places that allow us to reduce those costs for the borough and for the state and local developers. Unfortunately, that a lot of times ends up with little gravel pits everywhere. We have our large gravel pits, which are designed for our infrastructure with the railroad and developing large quantities of gravel for that. With those, by reducing the small size of these gravel pits and having small ones closer to the projects, that reduces the impact on traffic, and having large quantities of trucks and heavy loads going on our local roadways, which reduces the wear and tear on the local streets. It also allows smaller contractors to be able to come in and supply locally to smaller areas within the valley. The other thing with development within the valley, it's getting harder and harder to find these resources. I grew up off of Bogard. I used to be able to ride the four-wheelers and snow machines all the way to Sutton and Baldy without seeing a single house. Pretty much every single one of those trails have subdivisions and airports on them now. So it's getting harder as the valley has grown quite a bit in the last 25 years that I've been here. This makes it really hard to find properties that have suitable gravel. For one, we got to have gravel that we can actually use for building materials, be it spec materials that the borough requires, certain cleanness to the gravel, certain gradations, which is the size of the rock and the sand. The next is finding one that is in a suitable location. Unfortunately, some of these are near neighborhoods, which usually becomes a contentious point for the permitting process. With that, we've done a lot of things over the years to kind of help reduce that. And our plans that we put together through the borough have became pretty boilerplate, where we include noise plans, dust plans, stormwater runoff plans. There's a lot of things that are included with these plans, which over years have been proven to reduce the impact of our neighbors. Granted, we can't 100% reduce complaints, but we can address those complaints. We personally have a complaint system in Anchorage that people can call and leave a complaint with our office, and we have a follow-up system that's required by our employees that we need to address these and minimize the complaints and address them and fix them to make sure that we're keeping our neighbors happy. With that, the next thing is there's two types of permits currently in the valley. Many of you are probably already aware of them, but I'm going to touch on them anyway. The first one is the administrative permit, which is $1,000 for the permit fee. and it's for anything less than 2 years or 7,000 cubic yards. For reference, in the last meeting, they were talking about thousands of trucks leaving a gravel pit. These small permits, that's approximately 400 to 450 truckloads a year. That's not a lot of trucks coming out of that gravel pit. This also would build less than a mile road and approximately site work for 40 homes individually. So that's not a lot of gravel coming out of those small gravel pits. The next one is the conditional use permit for $1,500. And this one's anything more than 2 years and 7,000 yards annually. These are for the larger gravel pits. Even if you have one that's at the bottom end of that, you have to still go through the same process as a large gravel pit that's hauling millions of tons out of that gravel pit. This can create problems for us. Some of these permits can take up to 6 months to obtain. One of the things that we've came across is a lot of these, our large gravel sources, they're already permitted. We don't go through this process for them. But for, say, a Parks Highway improvement or Glen Highway improvement, we still have to go through this process, and it can take 6 months to get those. And usually when we get a project from DOT, we have to start building within a month. So you can see how it can be hard to start building without having any materials for 6 months into the project schedule. And then that's if you get the project. We've had them denied, and then that totally changes how we bid the project. So if we bid it coming out of certain gravel sources, now we may have to spend an extra $10, $20 to haul it from another gravel source, which can make serious impacts economically for us. The next one is that the CUPs themselves, the application process can cost upwards of $10,000, $20,000 just to develop the plan, to submit to the borough. And that includes DNR reclamation plans, which have to include a bond. You have stormwater pollution prevention plans, which you hire engineering firms that have professional engineers to stamp those for you. You have wetlands determinations. Again, you're hiring firms to do determinations for you if there's wetlands. There's surveying and subsurface exploration just to see if the property is viable. You have traffic control plans and just general labor just to compile all this documentation can be upwards of 200 man hours to develop one of these plans. That's a lot of cost to swallow when you get a permit denied. So one of the things that we've been confused on is the target that we're trying to meet with some of these permit applications is a moving target, where one permit had no problems getting that permit in the exact same conditions. The next permit 2 miles away, you get declined just because the right amount of people or the right person made the phone call to get it declined. So it makes it hard to know whether purchasing a property or investing in a property is even worth it, because it's a hit or miss flip of a coin if you're going to actually get the permit or not. Many of these permit conditions are boilerplate. So, I mean, a lot of times we have the same stormwater plans, the same thing. They just are tweaked to fit that site. And we have the same setbacks, same noise controls, dust, air quality permits. A lot of these things that we're applying for are already covered by other regulations. So it seems like we're spending money at the borough for them to review processes that are already covered by ADC and our stormwater pollution plans and EPA. I don't feel we need to rehash them over and over again. So it'd be nice to see some review of the process and the permitting application on seeing if some of those things can be co-joined with other agencies that are already covering those, and maybe just a review, like some of the applications that I submit for other agencies, they send them off to Fish and Game, for example, and Fish and Game will review and say, yes, this meets our standards for habitat permit. And you just have to meet those rather than the borough having to be the ones to make sure those meet each of those plans on their standards as well. And that's all I had for permit applications. Who's next?
So, yeah, thank you very much. And so next I'm going to invite Ryan Mormon up from Alaska Sand and Gravel to talk about, it's not just the borough permit process, but there's other agencies that are part of the process, both from health and safety. And then, but first we want to start off there. I think Ryan's the most pertinent person to Representative Nowers to answer your questions about reclamation in the slideshow and talk about the number of years it takes to develop a pit and what the end goals are. So if Ryan could come forward, we'll address that. And I see Mark Cattini has showed up as well, so.
Madam Mayor, pleasure, and members of the Assembly, thank you for hearing us today. My name is Ryan Mormon, and as Steve said, I work for Anchorage Sand and Gravel. I'm also the aggregate manager for Anchorage Sand and Gravel, and the Palmer Mine Site is one of my precious little babies that I take care of with the team out here in Palmer. I'd like to speak to the fact of the oversight that sand and gravel operations see. We tend to, as an organization, deal a lot with our senators and congressmen, dealing with MSHA, Mine Safety Health Organization. You know, we have a ton of oversight and a ton of cost associated with MSHA, which is a hybrid of OSHA, another regulatory agency. You know, we are regulated and how high berms have to be, you know, documentation, which all in turns to adds additional staff, from safety staff, environmental staff, you know, engineering, just kind of like we've already reiterated. It's a high cost, you know, profession on a very low margin product. So with speaking with that, you know, we have a lot of different agencies that we already deal with, you know, at a high cost. So we're already paying probably more than a normal business pays. Also, kind of going back into, everybody has a slideshow that was handed out, the packet. Oh, right on. Well, sounds good. This is kind of the best, the funnest part of the job. So this slideshow is a little blurb that we have from Sand Lake Pit in Anchorage. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the area on Diamond and Sand Lake Road in West Anchorage. So this area here, Sand Lake Clean Fill Site, started as a gravel mine back in the 1950s. And, you know, through the 50s, all of Sand Lake area was a gravel site, you know, heavily mined. It went to build the airport, schools, surrounding homes, malls. I mean, just a ton of different things. Go ahead and go to page 2. So again, this is 1950 of Sand Lake Pit. If you can kind of see it in yellow, that's the area that we're speaking of in West Anchorage. You go ahead and turn again. So this picture here is a good example of, as every pilot flies over, they say, hey, look at those ugly gravel pits down there. Well, this was 1981, West Anchorage, Sand Lake area. And yes, does it look horrible? I would agree. You know, as a miner, we're constantly moving overburden. That's the good topsoils to one pile to another for extracting minerals, you know, which we all use to build our dream homes and our schools and our block and everything else that we produce. So again, Sand Lake Pit is in the bottom left-hand side. And if you can go ahead and turn the slide. This, if you look at it, on the top part of the road of Sand Lake Road is now a subdivision called West Park. West Park has a total, I think, what is there, 177 acres in West Park. And there are currently 385 homes built, and it's not built out yet. But what that equates to, that old sand and gravel pit is now generating over $2 million, almost $3 million just in taxes, you know, for home development. So again, as industry, and then also members of the Assembly, we're looking at both sides. We're looking at the economics, you know, for future revenue for a community, and then also for businesses, how can we turn something that we mine into a usable area, which you can see here, it's already happening. It's taken since the 1950s, but the West Park area, it's beautiful. We've developed Lucy Pit in the top right-hand corner, which was another fill site, is now a park. And adjacent to that is the school district has bought property and is designated to a future school within that old sand and gravel pit. Again, all the housing. Then Sand Lake Pit, which we're talking about, is now entering into the reclamation phases, which we're talking about a bunch of different ideas, from sports field to have sports complexes, you know, all the soccer and football, and just have a lot of things for the neighborhood, tying together all the trails and parks. So again, we hear a lot from communities, members that are, it's that cycle of change. They're angry that things are changing. But if you really look, we're miners. All of us in this room are miners. We plan 50 years or more in advance. These plans have been in place for decades, and we constantly take a step trying to make these plans actually come to fruition. And it is through public involvement and through assemblies, whether it's in the borough, Anchorage, Fairbanks. We want this kind of thing to happen where it benefits everybody, the whole. But you do need sand and gravel. I mean, you can't build anything without it. And to answer some of the questions I know Ms. Nowers has had on the ability to build on these sites. What a lot of people don't realize, like Palmer, we're currently dredging, and we'd love, by the way, on a side note, to have everybody out for a tour. So we're making a big lake out in Palmer, and again, it's all electric. The dredge is 100% electric. All the fluids on the dredge, all the hydraulics are all plant-based, products. I mean, you could actually eat it. So super environmentally friendly. We deal with some of the best hydrologists literally in Alaska to make sure that we're protecting all water or anybody's wells or septic systems. It's a very big concern. However, we're mining below the water table, making a lake, but where the buildable areas are is as we're chasing the bedrock up. So we will actually be building up on bedrock. So we're very mindful on how far we dig down. Some areas we keep it 12 feet above the water table. Some people, we go right to the water table where we're going to dredge. So just keep in mind, of how we're actually mining. So again, try to give you a little more information on that. But again, you can flip through the slideshow and kind of show you the process of as things go. You can just go ahead and keep kind of going through each year as things change. So if you see here in 2019, on the far left-hand side, we're actually taking 10 acres of this site, and we've created 2 acres of B1A, which is a business zoning in Anchorage, and 8 acres of R2M, which is a medium density housing. So where this is going to be a park, we'll also have 10 acres stuck over to the side, which gives you more housing and to support a neighborhood, little cafe or coffee shop, whatever somebody wants to put there. So you can keep on going. And I think that might be the end. Yeah, and that's where we are today. So is there any questions that I might answer? Yes, Ms.
Assembly
McKee,
person, that's all right.
through the chair.
Okay, go ahead.
I really enjoyed the presentation. Why does it take 70 years to do this?
For the
People are dead by that time.
You're absolutely right. In some circumstances, when we have a high call for volume and demand, we're actually able to complete these projects faster. That's really what it boils down to is community demand. This site here, again, after the extraction, we've been using it as a clean fill site where we have all sorts of grubbing material, clays, peats, non-buildable material gets dumped in this site. So it's just taken a little longer. But again, for the gravel pits, it's also finding a good developer that can have the financial backing and get the permitting to actually build neighborhoods. During the West Park build, it was very contentious through West Anchorage. The community councils really fought it. They didn't want to see another development. But look at it now, everybody that lives there, West Park is a very beautiful neighborhood.
Okay, follow up, Assembly person McKee, follow up?
I was going to ask, you said it was a very high-cost profession with a low profit margin. Do you have any idea what the profit margin is?
That's something that I can't discuss, But again, if you look at our equipment, there's not one loader that we have that isn't close to $700,000 just for one loader. The cost of doing business for us, it's almost like medical. It has gotten to be so inflated, with fuel costs, transportation costs, our equipment costs. And again, we're also Anchorage Sand and Gravel, we've been here over 90 years. We're a very proud company that supports the unions. We have 3 unions that work with us, the operating engineers, teamsters, and laborers. So again, our labor costs are also high, which is great because we also want people to actually have a great paycheck and be able to buy all the toys and buy these nice homes.
I had another question too. Can I take one more?
Yeah.
You're talking about the whole process, which just seems extreme and obviously in some cases absurd to get through this permitting process. And it's like a crapshoot because at the end of it, they may say, I don't think so. How come there is not some model which, short of investing in the property, you've got your eye on it, you want to do this thing, that you can't go to the, kind of like fake through that, what I'm saying? Just put together the permitting process and say, okay, this is, how come it's a surprise at the end?
I believe that, folks say there's a surprise. I would probably say, members of the assembly, you probably hear more than I ever do of someone that comes up to this podium and says, I have never heard anything about it.
Yeah,
And everybody here has been talking about it for 2 or 3 years.
that's true.
And that's the hardest part, I think, of the assembly, and also as a producer, taking these ideas and plans not only to community councils, but also to the agencies, the DEC, lands departments, and saying, hey, we have this idea, we want to get this through. Super difficult to keep everybody tracking along the same page. It's
That's what it is.
harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we also look at, we have a lot of community involvement, and we do go to the community council and say, what do you want to see? And it's, I'm going to use the Sand Lake Community Council in Anchorage. We go to tons of community councils, and it's so interesting. We've been the constant star there for over 30, 40 years. And it's amazing the amount of ideas and how things have changed over the years. Some folks want, they want all trees. Some folks want greenhouses. Some folks want so many different things. And we're just trying to take all the information from all the community feedback and try to package it together. And that's actually, if I can say, the funnest part of my job is putting together all these different ideas and designs and saying, hey, will this work? And we have to make sure as industry, we can figure out, one, we have to stay profitable. If we're not profitable, we don't exist. Yeah, that's just part of it. So how can we stay profitable? How can we also give the community things that they need? And that's really the balance that we're striving for. If that answers you.
Assembly person hours.
Yeah.
I had one specific question on this, and then, just about reclamation is a big issue. So who did the development of the Sand Lake in terms of the
at this-
housing and?
Oh, it's Sand Lake. So we have a couple different contractors. We have Spinelli. We have Hallquist. Dave Hallquist was one of the primary owners of the West Park, had bought that from the municipality, that land.
So ASNG no longer owned it when the development took place?
Correct.
So the reclamation happened after ASNG sold it?
Pieces of it, yes. So what we do is, that part where West Park was outside of Anchorage Sand and Gravel. We're responsible for Lucy Pit, which is now a park, and then also Sand Lake area.
So a portion of this was reclaimed by ASNG?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And,
So
but the rest of it was somehow, how did the Muni end up with the land?
that I don't know. I think what happens is I do believe, like a lot of contractors we see in our industry, like I said, we've been around for getting close to 100 years. They come and go. And that's kind of why we pride ourselves, or we're involved with ARPA, is we want best practices. That's the best interest of everybody here. And we like to plan. I'm so proud. You can drive to our gravel pit over here and you can look at the way that we manage it. Our slopes are treed and reseeded. We already have in place on how we're actually going to end of life this. And that's great because it allows municipal planners at the municipal level to come and say, hey, wouldn't you rather have housing at that pit versus take farmland? That's really what we're talking about. Either we develop inside a pit or we take farmland. It's a trade-off.
Some follow-up questions. I mean, I'm interested in the reclamation in Anchorage, how that took place, but I'm more interested in what's happening out here.
Yes.
And those pits along the Glen Highway outside Palmer have already affected the water levels in the lake there. There's been documented payments that the company's made for flooding out at least one homer, septic and well, and then the lake levels themselves have risen because of the man-made lakes they've been, have been created. So there's a couple slides I just want to ask you about because you're more familiar with this property. If we could pull those up really quick, but you're familiar with it. Just to the south is the pit that Central Paving had, and AS&G has a property, actually, if you scroll through. So if we can blow up that one, this is 2006, what Central Paving said would happen to these pits after they were done being completed. So to the north is Palmer. This is just south of the shooting range. So on the left-hand side, as you're headed towards Palmer before you get to the shooting range, is what Central Paving, so that's a lake that was created with a marina and high-end subdivisions.
Correct.
On the other side is AS&G property, which all that pink is high-end subdivisions with a big lake.
Oh, that's not AS&G property. I don't believe that is still, was still part of the original other owners.
Okay,
Yes.
AS&G is just a little bit to the north. So that's what was supposed to happen with those pits. And then one more slide. There's just a couple quick slides. Okay,
Oh, no,
so
no problem.
that's what exists today. So that's the
Correct.
same area. The three lakes on the left-hand side of that picture are the Central Paving that was supposed to be the high-end marina with a subdivision. And it's been sold to a company that has turned it into a laydown yard and proposed it as a construction debris and asbestos dump. And it's apparently undevelopable because of the water issues. And it's those lakes that have been created that affect the lakes to the south, Canoe, Irene, et cetera, have bumped those levels up 21 million, like 3 feet, which is equivalent of 21 million gallons for those. And so, and then the bottom corner is what's happened to that other high end subdivision. And then if we can just one more slide.
Is that the first one?
Yeah, that first one. Which is the plan that AS&G has filed, which is the Pegasus Lake you're creating now. Behind, again, to the north is Palmer. This is Pioneer Meadows. Right behind that subdivision, that's Pegasus Lake with a high-end equestrian subdivision is what we're being promised. So I'm interested in reclamation that you've done in Anchorage. I'm more interested in why these pits aren't being reclaimed and the cost, back to the gravel tax. The question is there an impact on the residents? Well, that property that's 100 acres in that other picture that was supposed to be a marina is valued at $255,000. So 100 acres of prime, otherwise developable residential property is paying less in property taxes than my 1 acre, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, and apparently is undevelopable. So if we want the gravel, but if the land is left in a state that makes it completely devalued for us in the borough isn't developable, that's a lot of loss of property tax value and development over time. So I don't know if you can speak to that, but how is what was promised in 2006 turning into what a laydown yard, and what is there to, and maybe this is a bigger discussion to talk about reclamation, what is there to keep that from happening again with Pegasus Lake?
So to answer your questions, the first, you were talking about the other company across the road. One, I would say that Granite Construction is still mining. So they're still mining, they still have an active asphalt plant and, gravel pit.
But
So
not that other property that's been sold for a laydown yard.
The property for CEI, actually, we were offered to, I think, buy that many years ago, and that was probably a big mistake that AS&G didn't buy it. I'll come clean. We would, I think, love to have that property because we'd have control over it. Unfortunately, it was sold, and I understand we've had discussions with the owners of that company, and I would say that we're not happy at how that's been, how that played out. But again, we don't own that company. And that kind of comes back into lands, with regulations. And that's why ARPA's here, why we're trying to do best practices for all these kind of, gravel pits. If ARPA doesn't exist and we don't have good community, working with the community, you end up with situations like this. And
Follow
then,
up?
well, and then again, for Pegasus Lake, like all plans, again, subject to change as things go through in history. But this is just proof that we, as an aggregate producer, we're also looking 50 years in advance. We're already planning. So what rendition was back in 2006 has changed, you know, because as we deal with our hydrologists, like even we're following the bedrock, we're saying, oh, this little bend here, I can't do that. I can't get the dredge to do it, or it's got to move over here. So there's some things that you're going to see kind of some variations. But in general, the principle remains the same.
Just looks very similar. So how does this not turn into that? And why is that other property so devalued that it's worth $255,000 for 100 acres and isn't developable? And why will this
I
not?
wouldn't, you're talking CEI's property?
I mean, for the borough, I think it's a concern that if there's things that are happening with the mining that leave the land in a shape that's not developable, that's important to know. And are these plans just paper plans and there's no teeth in them at all? So we could end up with whatever?
Well, I think for all of us, speaking for all of us in industry, a lot of times you're waiting for, one, you have a plan in place. You're also, if they haven't exhausted all their reserves, they still are keeping some reserves, which I'm making that assumption that they still have some reserves on some of those properties. And two, also waiting for a good opportunity to come along. You know, most exhausted gravel pits have box stores, have big entities. So as a big corporation, you know, part of a big company, we also look at it and say, what are you going to do with that asset that's still on their books? And, you know, we still pay taxes on it. We're still looking for end of life. Yeah, at least that's the way Anchor Sand and Gravel looks at it. And I know members of ARPA, I think we all feel the same way. But our intent, Stephanie, Ms. Nowers, is 100% to do that, to end it with that.
And I don't have another question, but I understand the intent is good. I like a little more than that, given the history and that we don't allow mining in the water table elsewhere in the borough for reasons, so.
Well, if you look at mining under the water table, look at Fairbanks. Fairbanks is 100% dredging. I've been all around the United States with mining, and dredging is actually one of the most desirable areas to live. Let's take, for example, Minnesota. Minnesota, some of the highest value properties are around exhausted dredge ponds throughout the municipality of St. Paul and surrounding suburbs. High dollar. There are $1 million+ homes around dredge ponds. So it's kind of that balance. And again, we don't want to make a mistake as a community and build over the top of aggregate reserves. You know, if you look at the average cost of a new home, which I'm sure Mr. Sumner can tell you is what, $270,000 for a new starter home, somewhere in that line. How can people have affordable housing when, you know, aggregate mining, the cost of mining goes up and up and up, and product costs go up? It's a tough deal.
Do you have any examples of reclamation in the valley?
Yeah, I would love to give you a tour of Anchor Sand and Gravel, 100%. I mean, I think that's, you know, when we talk about people not really understanding what we do, love to have you out to Anchor Sand. You know, super proud of it, showing you what we're doing. We're already around the dredge pond. We've already cut a little trail, a little road around the lake. So the intent is in the future, if we can make it all work, we'll tie in a bike path around the lake, tie it into the trail system. You know, it's all these things that we want to do, and we're already putting them in play. It just takes it takes time. And that's, I guess, the hardest part of all of our jobs is the looking forward, you know, sorry.
That's okay, no problem. Assemblyperson Sumner, or Deputy Mayor rather, excuse me.
Yep. So I just had a couple questions. How many active gravel pits are left in Anchorage, or what volume of gravel is left to be extracted in Anchorage? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Or do you?
There's quite a bit of area in Anchorage, you know, that's still under either municipal, you know, lands or some BLM land. So there are areas, you know.
Does AS&G have any active gravel pits in Anchorage left?
We have our main site in Anchorage.
Yeah, but don't you guys haul to there or?
Correct. We do haul some of our reserves into Anchorage, and that comes actually from the valley.
Yeah, so where would the next closest gravel source be that has rail access, do you know, besides the valley?
I think you end up going further and further out. I mean, that's really the case. You just start moving out. I know you guys got to come bail me out.
Yeah, this is Patrick Cummins again.
Thank you.
The locations in Anchorage itself are not gravel pits. They're depots where we bring in material because trying to find a gravel pit in Anchorage, pretty much all the land that's in Anchorage that's available is peat. It's not buildable gravel material. Our nearest competitor that I know of, there might be others, but the biggest competitor is Clutna Inc. has a gravel pit in Eagle River off of North Eagle River exit.
Do they have rail access to that?
That's Siri. They have rail access, but they're probably to kind of tie this into the gravel tax. That would probably be the biggest thing is if the dollar amount that we're talking for a gravel pit happened, they would pretty much put the Anchorage depots out of business, which all the gravel coming from the valley would probably not happen anymore because that would make it cheaper to just bring it from Eagle River. Because right now they pretty much can compete with us all the way to the Seward Highway and Tudor. So Northeast Anchorage, we have a hard time competing with them with the cost of bringing it from the valley. So with the tax, that would make it even harder to compete with them because it's owned by Siri, so they have a lot of ways to get around other regulations that we have to deal with. So that makes it more difficult. And they're the only ones. Like I said, everything else is peat, so it's real hard to find gravel in Anchorage. That's why our gravel pit has been in Palmer. We started in the 70s for that reason, because just trying to find gravel in the peat bogs of Anchorage is tough.
Real quick, we'll move along here. Ms. Nowers, we have another presenter, Mr. Mark Cattini, who's a developer's representative and professional engineer, which I think will address some of the other questions. So all of us on Alaska Rock Products, there's different facets of this development. And in some cases, they all compete, but they come together to look at best practices. And like some of them are developing gravel pits because they're construction companies focused versus resource development or developing cement products, et cetera. So it's not all these companies are in the same mode, but they have similar interests and come together. I forgot to mention when introducing Ryan Moorman, he's a AS&G, Alaska Sand and Gravel, but he's also a resident and resides in Big Lake. With that, I'd like to introduce Mark Cattini, and Mark is probably one of the most level-headed kind of engineers, longtime family, Palmer family. I've known his brother, the surveyor, when I ran the GIS division, was active in helping me trying to get ground control established around the Mat-Su. But he's a local, but he also has his own small resources, but I think a great resource. And he's been chiming in I can't hear on my left ear, so he's trying to speak to me, but I think, Ms. Nowers, there's some questions as from a developer after the pit's been developed so far, that then a developer comes in and he has and has consulted and provides those professional services. So.
Let me just ask if Assembly Person Deputy Mayor Sumner had any follow-up to his questions. You're okay. All right. Go ahead, sir.
First off, I want to thank the entire Assembly for allowing us to come back a second time. My name's Mark Cattini. I'm third generation Mat-Su Valley resident. My grandfather built the mother lode. It used to be called the Little Susitna Lodge. So anyway, I grew up on the Fishhook. I grew up on a homestead out there, and we had a little gravel pit. As you know, the Fishhook Road right now, that gravel and that asphalt came off of my parents' property. So I grew up with it, and I guess that's why I'm still involved in gravel pit. My wife and I own part of that property now, and we have that little gravel pit there. So I'm a small operator. I represent small operators. I'm also a partner in Flintstone Inc. When the borough decided to start regulating gravel pits in the Mat-Su borough, They had workshops. I was a member of that. Some of these folks were, if not their predecessors were. And I want to really thank you because as a registered engineer in Alaska, California, and Hawaii, those other two states never gave me the opportunity as a professional engineer to work with a governing agency to make regulations that work for the governing agency and the miners or the land developers. So you guys are really doing our community a benefit by having this dialogue. And I really want to compliment you because it doesn't happen in California and it doesn't happen in Hawaii from personal and professional experience. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. One of the things that I'd like to address is Dee McKee's questions, if I may. Why does it take so long for these mines to get developed? As a landowner, and I've also worked with a lot of developers, but mainly for miners, if you start developing these subdivisions that they're proposing, their neighbors that they're bringing in to sell the lands, Ms. McKee, is that those neighbors are going to complain to shut them down. And all those neighbors will come in and fill this room and tell all you guys, shut down their operations. So a miner cannot start bringing housing in on their properties until after it's mined out. So it sits there and it looks ugly. And I agree, it looks ugly. And so you have to realize the environment we're in. The other thing is when you look at pictures like this, they're conceptual. And Stephanie, the reason they're conceptual is the real estate industry. What you have to make public offering statements, and they have to be very precise. Or land developers, like they refer to Holquist, Spinell Homes, any builder, if those public offering statements advertise and they get changed in the process, those builders and land developers will be sued, and rightfully so. So the best analogy I can give you guys is you wouldn't want a miner to be building a subdivision. You want a land developer that knows how to build houses, beautiful subdivisions, and all the infrastructure and everything. These guys are miners. They don't know how to do that. If you want to go to Hawaii, hire a pilot and get you to Hawaii, that's what these guys do. But if you have a heart problem, hire a doctor, and that's a cardiologist, that's when you have a builder that'll come in and take that property and turn it into something. So you're asking miners to do something they have no skill set, and they will mess it up. Okay? The other thing, the elephant in the room, our industry is no different than any other industry. We have some bad apples in our industry. You know, the main part of a bell curve is where we're all at. All these guys here are in the middle and they want to do the right thing. But on the outside of the bell curve, every industry, and our industry is no different. We have some bad operators. And those guys aren't here talking to you guys tonight. But you're bringing up pictures of those bad and since they're right, they're problems. But it's not these guys. We want to do what's right. And so you have to address that unique problem. And I can assure you, these big corporations, they're not going to mess it up so a developer can't come in afterwards. Maybe a bad apple is, but you know what? Every industry has it. We're not proud of it. And we're trying to clean up those guys and hold them accountable. And, you know, it happens in our small gravel pit on the Fishhook. You know, if we got truckers that are speeding through the neighborhood, we'll call them back and said, hey, guys, no speeding in these child areas, or we're not going to sell you gravel. And so that's how we try to do it internally. But you guys at at the regulation level has to deal with it. But these guys can't answer questions for those bad apples that, you know, the one bad apple that messes things up. And to put these guys thinking they're going to do the same thing down the road, there's a lot of areas that have been reclaimed in this borough for gravel pits. The whole corridor of the Palmer-Wasilla Highway, those are a lot of big hills. Now they're commercial and they're very beneficial for the public. And so there's a lot of reclamation but it isn't done by the miners. You know, we have to provide a plan. State of Alaska DNR holds a bond from us and money from us for reclamation. But that doesn't mean that we can't sell our property to a developer that'll do a good job and create a housing area, or to a commercial developer. So I'm speaking as a registered engineer that's made my whole career helping developers put in subdivisions. If you go back to the slide, Madam Clerk, on that where 385 homes were built, 386 homes, Quest Engineering, which I own and I'm the president of, we were involved with Dave Holquist when he developed that. And all of those phases through there have underground water, electric, sewer systems. And we worked many years before I was working, you know, came out here to do more work with the gravel guys and subdivisions out here. Keep going up, a little more. Yeah, right there. So in the middle, you see it looks like a ski track where it goes back and forth. It looks, you know, back and forth. All of those are phases after phases of that gravel pit. And they're all beautiful homes now. If you drive through it, beautiful lawns, a lot of families play in there. But again, and I would expect you're going to see that. And I personally live on a lake right now with my wife. Those lakes that's being created south of Palmer, there are going to be some high property homes around those lakes. And the other thing, these guys, they're monitoring where the water table is. We do it on all of our gravel pits, and the clients that I represent. You want to stay 12 feet or more above that water table, so you have room for buildings, septics, and all of that, unless there's a pipe water system. But most everyone will be staying above that, unless you're building a lake and you're dredging it out. But once they get away from that, they're going to have to come up, and they'll be above the water table. So I just want to let you know, there's a lot of industries involved to take a piece of land from timbered land, mine it, and then the industries that come in and develop housing or commercial behind that. But I want to get back to the tax stuff, if I've sufficiently answered the questions before we go off of that. Yes, ma'am.
You said when you're all done and it's exhausted, I guess that's the word that you used, and then you're selling it off to somebody. You've got some sort of a pact, a bond with the DNR that says this is what's going to happen at the end of this. But then you could just
Yes.
kind of like pass the buck at the end. And that sounds disparaging, but I don't really mean it to be that way. How can anybody ever be assured that this wonderful, that other piece that they had up there is actually going to happen, because you can sell it off to somebody else who never was going to do that in the first place? That's kind of scary.
So when our engineering firm submits packages to DNR for approvals, not only is there all the borough approvals, we have state approvals and we have federal approvals. And part of the state review is Alaska Department of Natural Resources. And for every acre that you mine, you have to put up a bond or cash with the DNR, and you have to show them what your reclamation plan is going to be to do that. And what I can tell you, the clients that I bring in, I ask them, what are you going to do? Is it going to be commercial? Is it going to be residential? Are you going to put it back to park? Are you going to put it to farmland, or a combination of that? And so we submit those plans for our clients showing that. And then as they develop it, they have to put up money with these agencies, and the state holds those monies. And so if it's not done to that, what's on those plans, then the state will come in and use those monies to do that reclamation. That's the whole purpose of that.
But they're not doing it, are they? I mean, because we don't see it.
Well, wait, when you say not doing it, you just saw pictures up here in the 1950s. I wasn't even
Oh, yeah.
born in the 1950s. So what you guys are looking at is a very small time frame. But you have to realize these things I'll probably be dead before some of this stuff gets developed.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
But there's mechanisms in place so the land isn't left as a wasteland.
So that even if you sell it off to somebody else,
You
Is your-
have to
is-
sell it off to someone
Oh,
else.
of course, and you're talking about, because those are the guys who know what they're doing.
Yeah,
And nobody, if nobody ever does anything with it, and it just stands there, a big hole in the ground, looking ugly.
okay.
You don't have any, nobody has any recourse to you as the original digger.
So what
Minor.
you're missing is that land is very valuable. Okay, so if he goes and buys a piece of property, Mr. Sumner goes and buys a piece of property and he's going to subdivide it and build homes on it, ma'am, he has to clear it, a good portion of it. He has to remove the topsoil for those homes and roads. When you look at these sites, all of that's already removed.
True.
Okay? And so now, and the other thing is, usually there's gravel left there to screen and build the roads, build septic systems and all of that. So the company that's buying it is buying a very valuable asset, very valuable, and it has residential value in it. So to think that what you see out there, when you fly over it and it looks like barren, that's very valuable property to a builder, a residential or a commercial. Look at the strip along Palmer-Wasilla Highway. You see all of that infrastructure there? At one time, those were ugly gravel pits if they had hills on them. And it's very valuable because of its location. To have housing tracts south of Palmer like this, as we start approaching 200,000 homes in this valley, or 200,000 population in this valley, it's going to continue to be valuable. So don't think it's wasteland. It's very, I cannot convey enough for residential builders and subdividers. It's very valuable. So they'll get it and they will build a product that they can sell, which are single family homes, and that's what they'll build. So I think it's, you're being led astray to believe that that's not valuable property, because it is.
It just doesn't look very valuable. That's what I'm looking at. And if I'm a person who's gonna maybe buy a home somewhere, and I look at that plan that said how the lakes are gonna be there, and I've got this great vision, well, that may not happen until my grandkids are, I mean, so let's just say I'm 25, I'm obviously not, but how long do I have to wait? There's no guarantee that what I'm seeing there is actually what I'm gonna be getting, is it?
You know, ma'am, there's no guarantees in life,
Well, that's true.
but what I'm.
You need to
Yes,
speak into the
because
mic,
again-
I'm sorry. You gotta speak into the mic.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I have a hard time hearing, that's why I was walking closer to her. So, yeah, there's no guarantees, but I can assure you, if the normal processes. A friend of mine, I was down in Washington State, he said, hey, I know you're doing gravel pit. I want to show you what I grew up watching as a kid. And he watched this ugly gravel pit going on. And he drove me by and I said, where's that ugly gravel pit? He said, you're looking at it. It was the most beautiful development you've ever seen. And it looks just like the Sand Lake. And that's down in Issaquah, Washington, ma'am. And as an engineer who's been in other states, they get developed into nice housing tracts or commercial. That just happens. And to think it's going to sit out as wasteland, I can't comprehend that thought. I'm sorry.
Maybe the problem isn't with you guys. Maybe it was with the next ones down the line. Somebody needs to put the teeth in those laws, rules, regulations, whatever, and make them actually happen. Because what we see as lay people is not the happy ending. We see
Yeah.
what looks like a wasteland.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I guess the thing is, you need to think in units of 25 years. You can't think in 5-year, you can't even think in decades. As I tell people, I'll be dead before the gravel is taken off of our property. It'll be part of my wife's and I trust, and it'll be helping whatever the trust is going to help. But you have to think more in decades. You have to take a block of 5 decades when you start looking at these developments, 50-year blocks. If you want to do it simple, take a 30-year block, another 30-year block, and think in 30-year blocks. To think in 5-year blocks, ma'am, or 1 year, it isn't reality.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it just isn't reality.
Thanks. I understand better what you're talking about.
Okay. Assembly.
Talk about the difference.
Steve, I want to recognize Assembly personnel for comments before we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. So what's the maximum cost for those bonds? What's the cost per acre that the state requires?
It's state regs, ma'am, and it has to do on as you're developing it. I can get you that if you'd like that.
So
It's public record.
I looked it up, so 750 per acre. So if we go back to that 100-acre parcel with that, sorry,
On the other slides, I don't.
on the other slides.
Thank you.
So that 100 acres would be the reclamation bond on that. It's the, if you go down to the 3 lakes, the one other slide, it'd be the third one. So the reclamation bond on that 100 acres is $75,000. So if, I guess my question is, kind of following up on Ms. McKee, is if the land gets left like that, so the company pays it, if it doesn't get reclaimed, they pay the bond. So in this case, we've been talking about $75,000. And then is there any sort of requirement that keeps us from ending up with something? I mean, I guess the concern is not that in 50 years this is going to be something. The concern is it's only good as a park or a dump because of the state of the land, that it's apparently undevelopable.
So when the state, my understanding, when the state put it, they didn't put the reclamation to create a subdivision. They put the reclamation in to come in and hydroseed it. So if you try to spend $75,000 to hydroseed that, you probably have a lot of hydroseeders that'll take you up on that. Okay, so that's just the bare bones. That's not to build a subdivision.
There's really nothing that requires a subdivision to be built on that.
That's correct. What it is the best use of that land. So these miners will pass it off the best, and any appraiser will tell you, you don't leave it vacant. You continue to use the best value, best use of that land, which will be residential housing or commercial housing.
So I guess that comes back to the question of this land. If it's being left in such a valuable state, how did it get sold to, why didn't it get sold to a developer who paid a lot more money than somebody who wanted to use it as a dump? Why is that? And so, and corollary, that piece of property with Pegasus Lake is just to the north there. And from a layperson point of view, again, it looks a lot alike. So why, if it truly is being left in a valuable state and it's not going to be left as a, park or a dump, why is that piece of property, why did it get sold the way
So
it did?
Stephanie, I need to say they're not my clients, but what I can tell you this, as a civil engineer that's trained in, one of the things we're trained in is waste management. As you know, we as a society produce a lot of waste. You can smell that waste when you drive past the waste scales on the way to Anchorage. When the leaves are off the tree, you can see that mountain of waste that's coming from the city of Anchorage that they're trying to cover up and keep the smell that we drive through when you go through the shooting range and the scales down there. Do you know what I'm talking about when you drive to Anchorage? We don't want that in the Mat-Su Valley, okay? And so those guys in Anchorage are trying to get rid of waste, so they look for holes in the Mat-Su Valley, or they look for holes going south of Anchorage. And I think that's what happened, ma'am, is that they came out, they found a hole, and they need to get rid of their waste, okay? So when you're addressing that and you're dealing with your landfill, think of that, because someday we're going to have the same problem as Anchorage, and you're seeing that problem unfold in Anchorage. And the more holes you have to fill, because you got to put the waste someplace. You guys need to figure out where to put the waste, because it's not stopping.
That's just kind of I guess my question is more along reclaiming that land. And so if it's actually being left in a valuable state, it's really surprising to me that with all the developers in the valley, and that's 3 miles from the Parks Glen interchange. So you couldn't ask for a better commute location. It's a beautiful piece of property. People who walked it know it. I mean, you can see mountains all the way around. So why did, that otherwise prime piece of property? Because you're saying basically it's not on the miner to do it. So they're going to get rid of the property. And then, but it's being left in there. The reclamation bond isn't really like 75,000. I can't imagine is going to really turn anybody's shoes on, forcing the issue to be developable. So if the real kind of teeth in it is that the land is so valuable being cleared of gravel that it'd be irresistible to somebody to develop it, it doesn't appear to be happening. So you're showing me Anchorage, which it sounds like that landed on the Muni. I'm kind of curious why it ended up with the Muni instead of like a private developer, again, if it's super valuable. But, I'm trying to understand how that happens so that we have some kind of like, I'm still trying to hear like, how does that not happen again? Because there's nothing, like the reclamation plan, you file it with the state, it is required, but there's no requirement that it be turned into anything that looks like that.
So Stephanie, let's do this. Let's have another meeting, okay? When we have the time to talk those big macro things and fix these bell curve tails that are causing problems for this valley that I cherish and love. Today, we prepared to talk about taxes and dealing with all that. And we weren't prepared we're not, I don't want you guys running to make decisions based on what we're talking here. It deserves another meeting to figure out how we stop that kind of stuff from happening.
And that, I would appreciate that. I mean, I think reclamation's a big issue. We want to see value, especially that's corridor coming into Palmer. We want to see that property produce value. And I just, 100 acres valued at 255,000, and you look just up the road and, there's a little commercial development on 12 acres that's worth 800,000, and so I want like the gravel to happen, but to have good development be able to at least have the ability to have good development follow that. So I think talking about reclamation and how we make sure it does happen and why it hasn't kind of happened in that corner would be really helpful for me.
Further
Okay.
comments from the assembly? Okay, go ahead.
Can I go ahead now with the part that, so as a civil engineer, I've helped a lot of land developers in that process. I had a lot of families that own gravel pits come to me here in the Matsu Borough when you started regulating, and this was like 12 years ago. So our engineering firm helped license about 6 of those. In the process, some of those people came and asked us to operate their gravel pits for them. So we set up a company called Flintstone, my partners and I, small operator. I want to tell you what small operators do. Small operators clear the land, sell some topsoil, and they may make investments in screens so they can screen septic rocks. So every time we want to flush a toilet, every time you flush a toilet, just remember, you wouldn't flush that toilet. You couldn't flush that toilet if it wasn't for some small operator gravel pit to screen out the material. Septic systems will not work without screened gravels. Or if you're in this place and it's going to the sewage treatment plant south of Palmer, it won't work without screened gravels. So anyway, I just want to put it in perspective. Everything needs gravel. There's no way we're going to get away from that. With that in mind, we started operating. And as small operators, the most value we add is screening. We don't do like the large operators and a bunch of gravel that goes to Anchorage. They add value by creating concrete products. And we have concrete plants out here, and they'll add cement, water, and add more value there. They may go into asphalt. It's the larger companies that add more value. So if you want a mental way of keeping track of large operators and small operators, look at the product that they're producing out the door. And if it's more than just screen rock and gravel, that's a medium size to larger. And most of your gravel pits around the valley, the lion's share of them, are small operators. Those small operators still have to do all the regulation requirements that you heard the big guys do. So if you think it's expensive for them, it's really expensive for us guys to even try to commit. Small operators are a community operator. For instance, us on the Palmer Fishhook, we take care of the people in the Palmer Fishhook. We do not haul gravel over to your neck of the woods, Stephanie. We just don't do that. People will not buy gravel from us and haul it halfway across the valley. There'll be another small operator over there that'll take care of that. And so you've got these cells of small operators, which for an environmental footprint and minimizing the impact, you want the small operators because they'll only truck in that area. The cost of gravel, screen gravel for small operators, is into trucking. It's not into gravel. The gravel is cheap, inexpensive for builders that are using our products. It's the trucking. So that's why we're limited to a small area, is to minimize that trucking. When you start removing small operators and you have to haul a long distance, your building costs are going to go up. And there's no way around that. So we're small operators. if you want a tax, they're going to pass that on. We can't eat that. We'll just pass that on to the people who buy our products. I would recommend that you don't tax the extraction of material. I would recommend that you, if you're going to do something, put a fee out for conditional use permits. So every year that I have to, that I'm updating my conditional use permit, let me pay a fee for that. It's easier for me. It's easier for the Mat-Su Borough to keep track of it. And so the Mat-Su Borough, if you're going to implement a tax system, you have two ways. You can weigh it with truck scales. Guess what? We small operators, we don't have truck scales. They're very expensive. You need to get electricity to that site to run a truck scale. After you get electricity, you need to buy it. You need to put it on concrete foundations. You need to have the state come in and license it every year. Just like your gas pumps are licensed, our scales have to be licensed. It's very expensive to have a scale. So if you're going to, the other way to do it is by truck count. Then you're going to be trusting small operators to make sure that they're paying their fair share of the tax. The only way you can do that if you have to come back as a borough is look at your LiDAR data. And your LiDAR will give you the contours of the property, and you look at it before and you look at it after, and you go, oh, they took out this many cubic yards of gravel. They should have paid the Mat-Su Borough their fair share of the tax based on the volume, not the weight. I'm going to hand out, if I may, Madam Clerk, what the state of Alaska geotechnical, there's one for everybody there now. And this manual was made in 1983. It's currently not being used, but on the second page, you'll see some red line information. I'll just walk you through that real quick. Everyone got their paper, second page? The first column, materials, that's clouded. You can see sand, sandy gravel, silt, and rock mixtures. That's rock and earth, bedrock, granite, goes on down. Column number 1, bank condition. That's what you find after you remove the topsoil and the trees. That's what's in the bank. That's the cubic yard, pounds per cubic yard. So if you're going to weigh it in a truck, you would find roughly that. Now you might say, where did all this come from? At the bottom, there's a footnote. It was 1981 Excavation Handbook, McGaw Hill Book Company. Anyway, you can see it varies tremendously. Column number 2 is loose. That's the pounds per cubic feet. When it's pulled out of the bank, it's in a stockpile, and it may be loaded in a truck. That's the loose weight. Number 3 is after that truck hauls it down the road. Let's say it's going to be on a road. It's going to get compacted in place, and then that's the weight. So really, it's column number 1, bank condition. That's what your LiDAR, column number 1 is what LiDAR will tie to. And let me tell you, we as engineers can give you an approximation, but it's difficult. If the borough ever had to come back and check on one of our small operators, that's maybe giving our industry a black eye, and they're a minority. And if you were trying to go in and say, oh, I need to get a accurate way of finding out what that gentleman owed me in taxes, you would go to something like column 1, and you'd probably use your engineers and you try to come up with something. It's doable, but it's hard, okay? Because in a gravel pit, you got all kinds of stuff. You got sand, you got sandy gravel, you may have some silt. If you have bedrock, that's a different story. And you might think, well, those numbers, what do they really mean? Well, bedrock's about 4,400 pounds per cubic yard. Cubic yard's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. A dump truck hauls about 10 of those cubic yards. And if you got sand, it's like 3,100. It doesn't weigh as much as the bedrock. Topsoil is 2,800. A lot of topsoil sold in the valley. So quite a difference. So again, if you're going to figure out a way to get monies from this industry, the mining industry, I think there's other ways to do that rather than taxing the material that's extracted from the ground. And I think before you go down that path, you just realize it's pretty complicated to do that because we don't have truck scales for the small guys, and buyers don't want us to hire someone to sit in a truck scale and weigh it and take it out to their site. They won't pay us to do that. So, yes, ma'am.
Can you just address real quick when you're talking points, was to talk as a small operator to the CUP permits, the old days versus when the permits came in, then that's another testimony.
Okay. I've been asked to talk for a small operator as far as the CUPs coming in. One of the things I want to bring out is that there was a whole bunch of existing pits that were grandfathered in, and they're functioning, they're doing whatever. I have a lot of clients that come to me with their property and they want to get a new gravel permit, a small community gravel pit, a small operator. And quite honestly, the way the regs are written, a conditional use permit is only good for 10 years. Do you know how long it takes us to pay off an excavator or a loader or a dump truck? Before we get all that equipment paid off, our condition for a new gravel pit, that conditional use permit is up. They have to go back in front of the planning commission and renew that. So quite honestly, I tell my clients, in 10 years, we're going back. And if you can't get it renewed, you're shut down. And now you've got, from a borough standpoint, you've got a partially developed piece of land in a gravel pit, and that gravel pit operator is not going to be able to shut it, is going to be able to finish it. So if you really want to do something for the industry of the small operators, I suggest looking at that regulation and matching that with the capital that needs to go in that these guys are paying. And so most of the guys that have come and talked to me, unless they're very, very large, they're just saying, you know what, we'll sell it to a residential builder or something, and they won't develop it. And you're going to see small operators, they're going to be no longer coming in. So I would look at that as an area. And to get permits through the Planning Commission now, we got another one we're going to try to go through. They're difficult to get, but that's just the essence of what we're faced with now. But I know you guys don't do that. That's at the Planning Commission. So did that help answer that question?
Yeah, it's just to have you address the chaos before the CUP process. There was quite a public process to put in the current CUP process and regulations.
The history on that.
And just succinctly, that the small operators have been supportive of that because it provides and ensures communication between the borough, the regulator, and the operator. And that was just what I hit. But
And I guess from a small operator, what you have now works very well. And to go increase an exemption, that's going to go back to what it was before we had the regulations. You know, and I don't remember what the magical number is, but when I heard it, it's like, why are we going backwards? It's worked. It's not broken. Why try to fix something that's not broken? That exemption as it exists now. And anyway, yeah, I don't think you'd want to do that, but ultimately you'll have to weigh all of that. It's really working quite well. And as long as everyone follows the regulations, and I tell the folks that we've got permitted, you know, it may say in the code to build a 10-foot berm, build a 15-foot berm. It's going to settle down to 10. Don't build your berms up to the property line. Leave a green belt, you know, pull away from that. And so and a lot of these small operators are doing it. Unless you get the couple of guys that are out on the bell curve that they're giving our industry a black eye, and I'm sorry, it happens in all industry, and I don't know how you fix that. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have from a small operator, a landowner, the margins, I'll echo what those guys are saying. The margins are small and it's high risk. You know, it's a very dangerous industry to be working in. Anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I know the rest of the gentlemen in the room appreciate the opportunity to come in and share a little bit with you what our world's all about. And if you want to come out and look at reclamation in our pits, you're more than welcome. I'd love to have you come out and show you what we're doing for the long-term benefit. Because we want to be good neighbors. And quite honestly, we've had our neighbors tell us, we're glad that the pits there, someone was going to go in and put in a bunch of real small housing developments. And they said, no, you guys are taking care of us. We'd prefer to keep it that way. And that told me we did our homework and we were good neighbors. Steve, I want to look real quick on this and see if there's any other thing.
We got it.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, so appreciate all of your time. I did want to take, one of our other members wants to introduce himself and talk about the difference between a developer and the mining operation, just real quickly, and then just wrap this up. So,
Okay, yeah, because as you all know, we do have another meeting at 6, and so we'd like to break at 5. It's best to feed us before we go into the 6 o'clock meeting. We're human like the rest of you guys. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Jim Mulhaney. I work for Quality Asphalt Paving. And as I sit back listening to the dialogue today, there seems to be one really clear miscommunication here, and that's with this reclamation. And people, I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying over here, but you think that reclamation is development, and it's not. When you talk about this, the reclamation permits with the DNR and stuff like that, it's not to build houses. It's not to do anything of that state. It's to get the gravel pit back in a safe condition for the public if they were going to be there. So when we put these reclamation plans in, it's to lessen the slopes, to make them 2-to-1s or 3-to-1s. It's to have a flat floor that's going to drain and not drain off the property. It has nothing to do with development. And I think everybody's looking at these pictures and they're going, well, hey, they're supposed to have reclamation. I've worked in Western Alaska. I've probably opened somewhere between 20 and 30 gravel pits in my career in Nome, Kotzebue, all over. The teeth are in there to close those gravel pits to make them safe, but not to make them developments. So I just want to try to clear that up, that, you're talking, for a lot of stuff, you're talking about people's private property, and they can do what they want with it. I mean, you can paint your house pink, and I might not like that, but it's your property. And that's what you've got with these companies that own private property. I would say I might be a little bit off base with the group's thought on this, but the Department of Natural Resources, they open up their property and then they sell their gravel for a royalty, and that's a good revenue stream for them. The mental health is trying to do that. They know that's a great way to get money away from what you're talking about with taxes. But if the borough was to develop their own land that they wanted to make gravel pits, then you could put the stipulations in that you could have it mined a certain way that would make it extremely desirable for a house builder or for a park or stuff like that. But you're asking private property owners to get from mining gravel to this beautiful park. And there's a huge lag in between there. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to clarify that for you. So the reality is a lot of these gravel pits are going to look like a gravel pit. They're going to have a flat floor. They're going to have gravel on them. Some of the development plans have putting topsoil down and seeding and replanting some trees and that, but that reclamation plan doesn't say, hey, build us a ball field, build us a deal. So, and I feel like there's a little confusion here in that. So I would tell you that reclamation plan with the DNR, it's got teeth in it. Every time I've closed a pit, I've had to provide pictures. I've had to show that we did everything with the slopes the right way. It was draining the right direction. The access was closed. It couldn't be accessed. All the crusher parts were picked up. Any contaminated material had to be cleaned up. That's what that reclamation plan's for. It's not for development.
Yeah, I hear you on that. The reclamation standards with the state are basically the slopes have to be back and the vegetation's there. And ideally, you've taken the topsoil off and then you put that back on. I guess the question is, why do you even file those plans with the big housing development and a equestrian subdivision and a marina in the first place?
Yeah, our company hasn't done that. I don't, I mean, the reality is from a minor, it's to get the gravel. That's what we're there for. And if somebody has the foresight or they intend to make a big subdivision or something like that, then they should follow through with it or this and that. But again, until you're talking about private property, and if somebody goes belly up, that doesn't mean that it's going to get done. I mean, if we were mining on the borough property, and I think the borough could get a lot of money out of the groups. I mean, every contractor that bids on the Parks Highway, the Glen Highway, all up and down, the first thing we do is go look for a gravel pit. That's the closest gravel pit to stop the expensive transportation cost. Whether it's privately owned, public owned, mental health, whoever, we're just looking for the source to get the gravel to do the job. So, and that's the thing. I mean, if there's going to be a big Parks Highway job and the borough's got a bunch of property, it would be great for the borough to say, hey, you know what, we're going to offer this up. You're going to pay $2 or 50 cents or a penny for royalty. The borough's going to get it. And then here's our mining condition. Maybe you could mine 20 feet, but the borough only wants you to mine 10 feet because that's what they think would be a good development. Then you would have control over that.
And I hear you on the private property as well. You can do with your property, whatever, but I think everybody in this room says gravel is an interim use. You're going to leave the land in some kind of condition that, I guess, my vision is there's 600 plus acres, maybe 800 coming into Palmer, that not all that land's going to something beyond a park and a dump, right? We're going to leave it interim uses is developable. So I think that the thing I'm trying to think about here is how we make sure that happens, because it is grandfathered that you're mining into the water table. I'm not hearing a lot on, I'm hearing you have a reclamation standard, but it is what it is.
Right.
And so, how do we get to making sure that land has got some value to the borough? Because I think that's where the borough and the public becomes involved, because if the land is so devalued, the tax value off that, just to come back to that 100 acres again, if that was developed as homes, the tax value that would help pay for all the services, the schools, the roads, et cetera, that would be shared by that piece of property. Instead, the rest of us are picking up the tab because that property has been totally devalued. So somewhere in there that, goal is that private property right exists, but the goal to have land that's left in a shape that is usable to the borough, especially in the core area, there's a strong value component for the borough for that. And I guess just one other question was, nobody's asked, but how much gravel do you estimate is produced in the valley, and how much of that goes into Anchorage?
I'm probably not the right person to ask.
Might be
that.
one for Steve.
Yeah, there's probably some more research on that. I would tell you that there's probably 1 million tons plus going into Anchorage. Maybe 2 million, depending on what the workload is, what it is. I mean, years in the past, big airport projects have taken tons of gravel. In the last 3 or 4 years, our company, QAP, hasn't brought very much gravel in at all.
Any idea, Steve or anybody else, how much is produced in the valley, estimated?
Just real quick and then we'll wrap it up.
Ma'am, Mark Cattini back at the microphone. I think you would be surprised how much gravel is sold by the small operators. I don't think the majority is going out of this valley. I think a lot of it is staying locally here with the small, if you add it all up. And maybe that'd be a good exercise to pull together, and we could work with some of the engineers at the borough and some of the engineers in private sector and come up with those numbers. But yeah, it's a pretty large number that stays local here, is my guess. Certainly gravel goes out. There's a demand, but just remember that gravel that goes out, comes back in building blocks. You know, building blocks, cement, it comes back here. It's being, they make blocks, and you look at it over at Wasilla and Sun Mountain, all those block buildings go up. Those blocks probably weren't made here. But the gravel came from here. The gravel certainly came from here. So anyway, I just want to let you know that.
So in respect to your time, and thank you very much for hanging in there with us. One thing I'll say is, from the testimony, you've realized that not all these operators are in the exact same niche market. There's builders, there's miners, there's land developers, there's engineers that are all involved and have their specialties. And it gets kind of heated when you start having this discussion, but it takes a bit of an even hand and a long-term vision to accomplish something meaningful. And, with that being said, I think industry has some ideas. Rather than trying to add a bunch of staff and accounting to count rocks, might be better served through the permitting process to have you need some assurity long-term that you made the investment in that process. But if you haven't renewed it annually or something, that then you go into default and you are forced to do reclamation if you're not going to continue to do that. Some of the dangers we're here to talk about, and why does it take so long, is if you had a need for that much gravel immediately, you'd have all sorts of different problems and development and roads and population boom in the Mat-Su. So don't really want the wild, wild west either. And through the CUP process that Mark Cattini kind of mentioned, one thing we didn't cover is we helped develop and embrace that. It wasn't it was we'll call it an engaging conversation with industry and the borough to get meaningful regulations for the CUP, but it's provided oversight and kind of fair dealing and communication between the public, the residents, the operators, and the borough. But if the borough is to take the landfill, for instance, sell off all that gravel, it's only going to, how many years, decades worth of gravel that need to be removed and moved to create a solid landfill at 49th State Street. And so the discussion needs to happen. I think that Mr. Sumner's putting forward is to have that discussion to figure out how the community can develop that, but then also not have other collateral damage in industry and other developers. But anytime you touch and move that gravel, it's a cost. And when you're developing that, you want to minimize the number of times you touch it. There's not enough room on that property to remove, sort, and store it all. You've got trail people that think that that's their trail when really they're trespassing across a solid landfill for community use at the moment. All that being said, we really appreciate the opportunity. It's not that straightforward, but I think industry has some ideas, and we have been very blessed over the years to work with the borough and individuals that have really helped develop it with some goals in mind. And all I can tell you is, if this discussion is about revenue, the borough needs to, through their planning and annual process as assembly people, agree on the 80% of the things they can agree on. And if taxes and diversifying the tax base, so it's not all property parcel owner taxes, that be it. Everybody's interested in that discussion. If it's just because there's some nasty thing that has to do with resources mining, that's a different story. Then let's open up that box and talk about farming and all the other things that we support as a community, as a tax base. But at the end of the day, I have really appreciated over the years to having some kind of an open dialogue with the borough, kind of an even-handed approach. But I know there's a couple issues, and I really appreciate Mr. Sumner, you bringing forward to have some kind of an open dialogue about the landfill, and it is an issue. The other stinky wicket out there that's I kind of got a bit of humor out of it when legislators started calling me about gravel production at the university research lands. To me, it's a red herring for the university in a time of trying to create revenue everywhere else. And I can't think of any worse opportunity than to plow over a bunch of research and supporting of ag and other things of places that we've used for research and the like. And there's so much gravel everywhere else. Who the heck would want it? But there was a dust up there for a while that revenue would go to Fairbanks, to the university rather than being enjoyed here. There's lots of drama. There's lots of social media. We appreciate your time. And hopefully, as you can tell, there's some passionate, very well-educated professionals. There's some others, like any other industry, maybe not so much, but they've all come together as competitors to try and help each other, and especially the small operators, because they have the lesser resources, and graciously the larger operators have really stepped up and helped define those standards. Kenai's had all sorts of arguments. I went down there to help monitor that, and it was kind of interesting talking about resource production and gravel there. At the end of the day, it was a very obnoxious operator and a very disturbed local resident. They were having a food fight in public that overstepped a meaningful discussion about development and making resources available. So with that, we can answer any questions. We really appreciate the opportunity. And as I think some of the operators have operated, just like we have farm tours, if you guys would like to go on a gravel tour and really see that, if there's some things that you'd like to, I think the operators even know, some loopholes in the current permitting process that we're willing to discuss. But it's terrible to have to individually go lobby each one of you, or to like, it would be better to do it as a public process and have some people involved and do it in the open. And we are very pleased to be here today. Again, I'll thank you that we're able to to talk to you in the open. It's available to the public. We're not having private conversations. And especially Ms. Nowers, I know you live in an area that has some concern, but I think you have a bunch of caring and passionate developers willing and looking to talk to you to figure out what that end goal is and figure out what that opportunity is. And sometimes it just doesn't happen fast enough. I did forget to mention that AS&G told me that I was probably one of the only complainants about Sand Lake, because as a nerd teenager, I used to toss my remote control glider off Sand Lake Road over the top of that, and it was the best thermal production hill for me and my nerd friends. I will mention that I forgot to leave that out. So if you have any questions, we really appreciate your time. And again, Mr. Sumner, I know we're not here to talk about existing legislation, but there are some things that industry needs to communicate and work somehow. There's some dialogue, whether it's a committee or something there, industry and other concerns to help figure out how to get that produced for the benefit of the borough.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Alrighty, so with that, we'll go ahead and close our discussion item of business, and we will come to the staff and or assembly comments. Come on, Attorney, no? Assemblyperson McKee, have comments?
Well, it's kind of like a question. When I very first came in, Steve was saying, I believe it was Steve was saying something about the state got out of taxing gravel businesses, that got out of that. How do they, since they didn't get the taxes anymore, how do they get the return on their investment on letting them do, you know what I'm saying?
So the state got out of that because they were spending more money in 2012. So Representative Seaton in the Kenai Peninsula sponsored a bill. They were spending more money trying to track it.
Yeah.
And had more government than they produced in a tax for no return and no reporting, when they had the other processes through DNR that had to do with reclamation and permitting versus trying to tax gravel, which is different than other types of mining. And the other thing in the Kenai, many of the public concerns and the like and comments on the Kenai weren't from private development. They were from abandoned government gravel pits that were in disarray along the highway. And it's just interesting. So the state has pits, costs them money to maintain all of those, but to the tax itself, it doesn't generate enough. And you have to go out and audit for it to be fair. And then if you have a problem, you have to have a resolution, a survey, et cetera, and who pays for that, versus handling it through the permit process and defining the outcomes that you wanted. So DNR defining the outcomes for reclamation after the pit has been mined, and other opportunities, not waiting till the very end, but kind of a cycle of reclamation, a progressive. But in the legislation in 2012, it was enacted in June of 2012. They got rid of it. It just was too much bureaucracy, and it didn't generate any revenue. But that's a completely different discussion than the permitting process, the bonding process, the reclamation process. So, yes.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that if they said, well, heck with it, then we just let it go. I know they didn't do that. What did they do? Where did they get their money from?
Again, Ryan Mormon, in response to your question, real quick.
Okay.
One thing, our biggest customers and for Anchorage Sand and Gravel, probably QAP, Granite, are the state of Alaska and the municipalities and borough. That's our biggest customer. 80-90% of our customer, of our sales are to state entities. So the states were finding out that they were actually taxing themselves. And they looked at it and said, holy cow, we're actually imposing a tax. We're paying more for the goods. And it was just a turn. So it really voided itself out. And that was the second biggest part of why the taxes went away.
And Mark Cattini here, and the small operators, Steve says it was a bureaucracy. Let me tell you what it was. We almost needed a full-time person on staff to process the state regulations. Because as you heard, most landowners are not miners. They just get royalty. So Flintstone is operating in these places, and we keep track of what we owe our landowners royalty. The state had us fill out forms for that, and we paid our taxes, Flintstone. When we send the money over to the landowner, the state was requiring the landowner. So you got little mom and pop retired landowner that owns the land. They get the money from us. Now they have to fill out a different state form. Well, there was someone at the state that was comparing this form with this form. And if they didn't match, guess what they did? They sent it back to us. And I think the state also got really tired of trying to herd cats for us small operators, because it was a nightmare. We were spending so much time. And at the end of the day, the state had an exemption. So we ended up paying zero taxes. The landowner ended up paying zero because we're small operators. State taxes were for large, but they made everyone do reporting to figure out if they passed the threshold. And so they finally made the right decision and got rid of that messed up bureaucracy for taxing gravel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will mention in closing,
Okay.
the other issue, the previous proposed Matsu Borough gravel tax in the previous assembly, one department would have been paying tax to the general fund of the borough. The borough would have been the largest taxpayer moving gravel from the landfill. And that's, I think, part of this discussion is there has to be some discussion, but why should the borough be allowed to exempt their gravel and tax everybody else's? So that being said, it was just untenable.
Assemblyperson 2, comments?
Thank you for your presentation.
Assemblyperson Demir?
Thank you again.
You have comment? Okay. Let's see, Assemblyperson Hale, are you still on the line, sir? Do you have comments?
I am. I just want to say thank you to the industry folks for coming out tonight.
Okay, Stephanie, Assemblyperson Hours?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation. And I do think we need to have more of a conversation about reclamation and mining into the water table, because it just seems like something's fallen through the cracks. You know, we asked the borough to run a record and they didn't have any records of pits that have been reclaimed. So notifications not coming back that way. And I looked at the state records And all those pits on the highway right now, all listed as active, including the 100 acres that got sold, I think it was in 2012 or 2013. So it's been sold for 8-9 years and hasn't been actively mined. That's the one, the dump laydown yard. And, you know, borough regs are within 4 years. You've got to file that. The state doesn't, I think they just say practically possible. You know, they don't have any limit on it. So I think just given the situation that's happened, I think we need to just have more of a conversation about the reclamation and that mining into the water table. Cause you know, that I had the hydrology, like I can tell you, it affected Canoe and Irene Lake, and there was flooding across the highway from that pit when they pumped it over, and they had to pay John Line over there $37,000 to place his septic and his well. So there's some issues there, and just making sure that you do with your property until it starts to affect my property. And so if you're affecting the water on other people's property, potentially affecting that starts to become an issue. And then if the land gets devalued, I think that becomes an issue too. So I do really appreciate the conversation and look forward to more of a discussion. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, I'd just like to thank you folks for coming out, and I do think that potentially we should look into creating more a more graded CUP process. I don't think that the process should be so stringent that we only get extremely large gravel pits going forward. You know, right now it's effectively the same for anybody that's over the threshold, and possibly there should be some lower threshold for smaller pits to allow for those to exist as well. But yeah, just a thought. Thanks.
Okay, and I again would just thank you again for your patience, and I'm glad that we were this evening being able to devote all of this time to you and to get your input and to better understand your industry. And with that, at 4:55, I will adjourn the meeting.